A long, long time ago, there was a very small village. Let's call it S Village. It was nestled in a remote region, with a clean mountain stream rich in fish and nearby hills abundant with edible wild plants and vegetables. It wasn't luxurious by any means, but the villagers had what they needed to live. Maybe because they were able to provide most of their food through foraging, hunting, and small-scale farming, there was little contact with other villagers. Aside from the occasional trading for salt or rice, they were completely self-sufficient. And then one day an elderly man in S Village fell seriously ill. His symptoms were frightening: a high fever, constant vomiting, and violent coughing fits. The village didn't have a doctor, so one of the younger men set out on foot, crossing through the forest to the next village to ask for help. By the time the doctor arrived, the old man was barely breathing. With one final deep rattling cough, he passed on. The doctor stayed a few days, and just as he was about to leave, thanked with a bundle of fish and mountain vegetables, another person in S Village fell ill. This time it was a middle-aged woman who had been taking care of the old man. She had the same symptoms: fever, vomiting, and relentless coughing. The doctor examined her, but he'd never seen anything like it. He had no idea how to treat it. And then another case appeared. A young man who lived nearby, along with his entire family, collapsed with the same signs. The doctor realized this was serious. He returned to the village immediately to warn the elders. "There's an outbreak in the next village. It's something I've never seen before." Word spread quickly. The village head gathered with the leaders from the surrounding areas, and together they made a decision. A few days later, a young man from S Village arrived, begging for help. "Please, help us. There are only 4 adults left who can still walk, including me. Everyone else, women, children, we're suffering. Please save us." The village head listened quietly, and then paused and smiled. And without hesitation, he grabbed a nearby garden tool, a hoe, and killed the young man with a single blow. He ordered his people not to touch the body. Instead, he gathered dozens of men from his own and nearby villages and led them, that very night, to S Village. Some brought bundles of straw, others carried sharpened bamboo spears. Under the light of a pale moon, they quietly spread straw around the entrances to the village homes and piled it up near the walls of every house. Then they were poised, ready to light the dry coarse straw with a flaming torch, waiting on the village elder to give the order. Then they positioned men with spears at strategic points beyond where they expected the flames to reach, to catch any escapees. Even while they prepared, they could hear the sounds drifting from inside the village: low groans, sickly cries, wet coughing, and the occasional scream, the sound of someone retching. They waited until the hour grew late, and then the village head gave the order. Flames erupted into the night. The straw burned fast, consuming the houses and lighting the village in a wall of fire. People shouted, "Fire! Fire! Run!" The villagers, some healthy, most terribly sick, stumbled out in panic. But those who were too weak, too far gone, couldn't stand. They collapsed in the flames. Others, still able to move, tried to flee, only to be met on the other side of the blaze by spear-wielding men in the dark. No one made it out of S Village. By the time dawn broke, there was no living residents left. The next day, under orders from the village head, trees from the nearby mountain were cut down and used to completely bury and burn what remained. And just like that, in a single night, S Village was wiped from existence. No records, no survivors. The village head made one final decree: no one is to speak of what happened. And the people obeyed. After all, S Village had barely existed on any maps to begin with. They traded sparsely, and they had no allies. It didn't take long for the world to forget them entirely. Years passed, then decades, and eventually even the memory of the incident was gone, until whispers began to surface. Stories, rumors, a clearing deep in the mountain where you can still hear moaning. A ghost of a young man with a broken neck wandering around the forest with a hoe in hand. The spirits of the villagers charred and choking, trying to drag the living down into the ground with them. I first heard this story from my great-grandmother. She said she couldn't remember the name of the village, but she tried. Sugiyama? She couldn't say for sure, but she was born in a tiny farming village that eventually became part of Aomori City in northern Japan. So even when I started hearing urban legends about a place called Sugisawa Village, a village supposedly wiped from maps after a massacre, a place cursed and buried so deeply even its name was forbidden, I couldn't help but wonder, Grandma, you didn't mean Sugisawa Village, did you? Hi, Jay here. There is a place called Sugisawa between Fujisaki and Namioka in Aomori Prefecture. However, there is no documented connection to this urban legend of Sugisawa Village. This legend exploded into popularity in the 1990s and early 2000s as one of Japan's most enduring horror myths. It has since become the subject of numerous TV specials, books, and online theories, but no conclusive evidence has ever surfaced about its truth, which of course makes it all the more unsettling. I'm into solo touring on an off-road bike. It's my main hobby. Whenever there's a long weekend, I'll head out on my own and disappear for a few days. This summer, during Obon, I planned a 3-night, 4-day trip. Destination, the southern tip of Kyushu. Now, just racing down the expressway straight to my goal wouldn't have been any fun. The real thrill is finding scenic spots and tasty-looking forest trails along the way. Day 1, mostly expressway, the engine felt great. At speeds over 100 kilometers per hour, the front wheels started to wobble a little. Probably from a crash that I'd had in the past, but it was manageable. I stayed over at a friend's place in Fukuoka that night. Day 2, back roads mainly. Took my time, dropped by a hot spring, cruised through Aso, and took a bunch of photos. But I might have dawdled too much. By evening, I was still far from my intended stop. I should have been in Kagoshima by now, but I was somewhere dead between Kumamoto and Miyazaki. I considered hopping on the expressway, but just ahead was one of those legendary super forest trails that I'd been dying to ride. My personal highlight of the whole trip. And hey, I hadn't booked a hotel or a ryokan, so there was no real rush. So I made the obvious choice and I took the turn off into the woods. Man, that was a bad idea. The winding mountain pass was beautiful, exactly what I'd come out here for. This was real, something you don't really get in everyday life. At the bottom of the slope I pulled over and took a break. Across the road, a stream flowed with a cool, clean sound, and that's when I noticed a small bridge spanning into the stream, and beyond it, a tiny weather-worn Shinto shrine. Off to the side of the shrine, a gravel path led into the next mountain over, and there was still light in the sky. To an off-roader like me, that flat dirt trail was practically begging to be explored. And there were no houses around, no other bikes or hikers in sight, so I figured no one would complain if I opened it up a bit. I pulled down my goggles and tore off down the path, the 2-stroke engine howling. The corners were wide and easy to read, so I let myself play, dropping a foot out, throwing the bike into tight turns. Even if I stacked it, there were no guardrails there. The trees lining the outer edges would stop me if I slid if it came to it, but I'd gotten too into it. Somewhere along the way, I'd let my speed creep up beyond what the trail could really handle. And in one long corner, I overdid the rear slide. The whole bike spun sideways. I instinctively tried to pull it back, but I'd already picked up too much speed. The block pattern tire suddenly caught the trail road. Too hard, too sudden, and before I had time to think, shit, I was launched. The bike snapped upright violently, tossing me into the air. I caught a flash of it, flipping over me, upside down, before it got smashed into the ground ahead. When I came to, I was on that trail road. Lucky for me, though, I'd been flung along the trail itself, not into the trees or the jagged rocks. Everything hurt, of course, but I could move, and that was massive. Nothing was broken, I figured. So I stood up slowly, wobbling towards the wreck. The blinkers in the mirror had been snapped off, the gauges were shattered, and after I got my bearings and my breath back, I tried kick-starting the engine. But no surprise. Nothing. The front fork was twisted, pinching the tire. It was completely dead. A write-off. The sun was sinking fast, and of course, there was no signal on my phone way out in the mountains. "Guess I'm walking then," I said, as I dragged my bike off the trail and propped it out of the way. I hung my jacket on the bent handlebar and slung my backpack over my shoulders, and I turned on my flashlight. With no other choice, I started walking on foot. Thoroughly miserable. I must have walked for 3 hours. Something wasn't right. By now, I should have reached that stream, the one by that little shrine. The trail felt the same. I guess I must have taken a wrong turn or something. The slope on my left was still the mountainside, and the open sky stretched out to the right. But the shrine was nowhere in sight. I stopped to check my map, but in the dark it felt useless. The clouds had rolled in, blocking even more moonlight. No stars, no glow from any towns. If I hadn't had my flashlight, I could have easily walked right off a cliff. I decided to take a break. I sat down and I lit a cigarette. I could hear the river, but I couldn't see the shrine. Maybe I had gone off course after all. But either way, it looked like I'd be spending the night outdoors. I was too tired to keep walking. Everything hurt. I just needed to find a spot out of the road where I wouldn't get run over if by some miracle someone else came through. So I got up and I told myself to keep moving, and I started walking again, against the protests of every pain in my body. Then the trail opened up. Suddenly, without warning, there was a village right in front of me, but not a single light was on anywhere. A completely abandoned place. I must have wandered off down a side path and ended up here by accident. I swept my flashlight across the buildings. Most of them were old wooden houses, half collapsed. I saw what looked like a rusted-out water tower looming in the darkness. The place must have been abandoned for decades. It was eerie, sure, but also kind of fascinating, so I decided to look around for a bit. It wasn't big, maybe 5 or 6 small homes scattered up the slope. So, could you even call that a village? More like a cluster. Almost every house was covered in ivy. Parts of the walls were caved in, rooms exposed to the open air. The front doors were locked, technically, but it didn't really mean anything anymore. At the center of the settlement, a stone stairway led upward. I passed a few wells along the way, each sealed with a wooden lid. I snapped a few photos, just to mark the place, although I wasn't confident they would come out good considering how dark it was. Eventually I leaned against one of the more intact houses, and I wrapped a towel around my face. I sprayed myself with bug spray, and I laid down. Sleeping on the ground didn't sound appealing, so this was going to be the best I could get. I was exhausted, and sleep came fast. Something woke me an unknown time later. There was a sound. Not outside, but inside. Inside the house. It was a creaking sound. Something was moving inside, slowly. At first I thought it was just the house settling, but the rhythm was too even. too deliberate. Soft footsteps pacing the floor. I got up quickly to take a look. The top half of the front door was frosted glass, so I couldn't see in. Was someone living in there, in this ruined place? Still with my body against the door, I pressed my ear closer. I could hear that creaking again. There was no doubt now. Someone was inside that house. The moon had come out, casting the whole decayed village in a pale, ghostly light. That's when the full weight of my situation sank in. There shouldn't be anyone here but me. I could feel my pulse in my neck. Something unknown was right behind this door, and it knew I was here. There was a clunking sound now. It was a different noise, off to the side. I looked around. Nothing. Then I was stuck. My body wouldn't move. It wasn't fear alone. It was like something had locked me into place. My first ever sleep paralysis, only I was wide awake. And the only thing I could move was my eyes. That's when I saw it. In the house directly ahead, down the slope, past the well, a dark silhouette passed silently in front of the window. Then again. Back and forth, slowly pacing. Still, I couldn't move. Behind me, in that house I was leaning against, the footsteps continued. And then my eyes caught something else. The lid on the well nearby, it had been knocked aside, and from inside that well, a face was staring at me. Just the eyes. Pale skin, half submerged in shadow, but unmistakably watching me. I turned my eyes back towards the house opposite. Another face now pressed against its window. White as paper, utterly motionless. And then, on the frosted glass right in front of me, a shape pressed against it. Eyes staring straight out. A scream ripped out of me and broke whatever spell kept me frozen to my spot. I grabbed my helmet and ran. I didn't even think about the flashlight. I just sprinted blindly into the trees, using the moonlight as my guide. I kept running until my side felt like it was tearing open. And then I walked, and I kept walking. I just couldn't stop. I couldn't even think about resting. And just before dawn I reached a town. The eastern sky was starting to lighten. I found the first bus terminal and I took the earliest highway bus home. I never saw my bike again, but I had it towed and scrapped. My body was bruised all over. It really had become a cursed ride. Even now when I remember it, I can't shake the feeling that ghosts really do exist, because that was all too vivid, too real. And the photos I took that night, they didn't capture any ghosts, no figures, nothing unusual. But when I looked really closely on one of them, behind one of the houses, slightly elevated, the flash caught something. A cluster of moss-covered gravestones, half buried, weathered, and forgotten. Now it makes sense, I guess. A place like that? Yeah, weird things are bound to happen there. A co-worker told me this. I asked if it was fine to share, and he said yeah. Back when he was a student, he went through a phase where he was completely hooked on making films. Short indie projects, mostly horror. He wasn't alone in it either. He was with a small group of students who were in the same film club. They were all passionate about trying to scare each other and themselves with their films. One summer they decided to shoot their newest project in a truly isolated location, an abandoned village, deep in the mountains. No one visited there anymore. There were no signs, no power lines, not even paved roads. It was the kind of place you'd never find unless someone told you exactly how to get there, and even then you'd hesitate. It was the perfect setting. Rotting wooden houses, swallowed up by vegetation, rusted tin rooftops barely hanging on, and silence all around. They camped there. 2 nights, maybe 3. Sleeping in tents they set up in what used to be the village center. The buildings nearby were too unstable to risk staying in. They looked as if they could collapse at any moment, and they were hiding sharp debris, like nails in glass. It was on the 2nd night that something strange happened. A noise woke them up, not all at once, but one by one. It was the sound of a dog barking. It sounded distant at first, unnaturally clear, like it was being piped directly into their ears. There was only one though, no chorus, no growling, just that single bark over and over. They sat up in their sleeping bags listening. At first it was easy to brush off, a stray, a wild dog, maybe something had wandered down from the mountains, but the tone of the barking was off, not aggressive, not warning. It had a rhythm, a cadence that didn't feel right. And as the minutes passed, the barking grew closer, too close. Someone whispered that it might be a feral dog, maybe rabid. They turned off their lamps and froze in the dark, waiting, sweat amassing on their collective brows. Then the sound crossed into the perimeter of their camp. The barking thing, whatever it was, started walking in circles around the tents. Each step could be heard. In the way, the undergrowth crunched and shifted. Once, twice, around again. Then someone finally whispered in a low voice what they were all thinking. "Hey, that doesn't sound like a dog." Because that part they hadn't fully processed. It had been nagging at the back of their minds since the first bark, but now that it was close enough, now that it was just on the other side of the tent fabric, they would hear it clearly. And it wasn't a dog. It was something trying to sound like a dog. And it was failing. And it got the rhythm wrong, the tone wrong, the bark. It just wasn't right, it was imitating. And between the barks it would slip in curses, human words, spat out like an echo from something that didn't understand what it was saying. It circled their camp like that, all night. And they didn't sleep. No one moved, no one dared to unzip their tents. They just sat there, separated by that thin layer of nylon, as this thing kept pacing in the dark, mocking the sound of a dog, attempting to seem human through some distorted parody of a voice. And when dawn finally broke, it stopped. There were no footsteps, no parting noise. It was just gone. They waited until the sun had risen, well above the ridge, before stepping out. The ground around the tents was damp, with dew, soft enough to preserve any tracks, but there was nothing. No footprints, no paw prints, no broken branches, no sign that anything had ever been there at all. They packed up and left within the hour. No one said much. Later, when they reviewed their footage and planned their final edit, they decided to cut the abandoned village sequence from their film entirely. They never finished that film. It was shelved, incomplete. They abandoned their project. No one wanted to speak of that night out in that desolate village ever again. This is a strange experience that my former club advisor once told me about. It happened when he was younger, during a solo mountain hike. The mountain he climbed is located somewhere in the Chugoku mountain range, an area that used to be dotted with villages and small settlements. But over time, the population declined. Many of those old places became abandoned. He had recently developed an interest in photographing these abandoned villages, documenting their remains before they were completely swallowed by the mountains. So on that day he set out to find one. He brought along old maps and compared them to current ones, tracing possible locations of villages that no longer existed. While walking, he noticed something just off the trail, what looked like the faint trace of an old road, half hidden beneath leaves and undergrowth. Maybe this leads to one. He followed it. After some time, the path opened up into a slightly wider clearing. There, standing in the middle of it, was an old wooden sign. It bore the name of a village, the one he'd been looking for, and the remaining distance. It wasn't far now. He checked the direction and continued forward. Before long, the weeds and overgrowth began to thin out, and the path gradually turned into something more defined. It was subtle, but it felt like someone had been maintaining it. A little while later, he reached the village, only it wasn't what he expected. There were houses, structures still standing, gravel laid neatly across the roads, and it didn't look like a ruin at all. It looked like a normal, functioning village, which was confusing. The map he used was printed this year, and yet this place still wasn't marked on it. Still puzzled, he stepped in further. There were signs of life, clotheslines, gardens, even tools. Everything looked lived in, but there wasn't a single person in sight. He wandered the village for some time. It was Sunday, so he'd expect to see someone, an elderly person tending to a garden, a child playing, someone outside, something. But it was utterly silent. The buildings weren't crumbling, they were intact. Some even had smoke stains above the doors, as if they'd been used recently. But there was no movement, no voices, no footsteps. He felt like the village was holding its breath. Still curious and now slightly uneasy, he decided to climb to a nearby shrine that had been marked on one of the maps. It sat on a hill just outside of the village, and from there he hoped to get a better view. Maybe someone would be visible from above. He made his way up the stone steps, reaching the small shrine tucked into the trees, and there, standing quietly in the shrine grounds, was a young girl. At last, he thought, someone. But before he could speak, she looked straight at him and asked, "Are you from outside?" The way she said, "Oh my," that word, that's a rough way of referring to someone. It threw him off a bit. It was impolite. Totally informal. Still, he answered, "Yeah, I came from the town. Do people still live here?" She shook her head. "No, this is an abandoned village and you should leave, because when it gets to noon, they'll come back, and if they find you here, you won't be able to leave." He asked her what she meant, and she just said, "The adults." "What adults? Where were they?" But she didn't explain. She just said, "It's fine, just go. If you take the path behind the shrine, you can get out quicker. Go now, hurry." She wasn't joking. There was something in her voice, not fear exactly, but urgency. Something she didn't want to say outright. He figured there was no point in pushing. He nodded and turned around, and went the way she pointed. As he walked, the surroundings seemed to melt back into the forest. Eventually, without really knowing how, he ended up back on his original trail, and from there he descended the mountain and returned to the base without incident. Later, he looked into that village. It was real, listed in some older regional records. And just as the girl had said, it officially had become uninhabited sometime in the middle of the Showa era, left to rot due to population decline. The place was known locally as an abandoned village, and it had been like that for decades. Even after that experience, he didn't stop visiting abandoned villages, and when I asked him about it, about that day, I said, "You had an encounter like that and you still kept going?" He just laughed and said, "They say the mountains are full of borderlands, don't they? Some even say that you can get spirited away to other worlds, different times, in the mountains. All kinds of strange things can happen out there. And I guess that's why I love them." I got nothing to do, so I figured I'd kill some time and write this up. I've been into exploring abandoned places for as long as I can remember. This happened a while back while I was checking out a deserted village. That day, I decided to head out with a friend to visit a particular village we'd read about in a Katsutori magazine, a kind of low-grade pulp rag that loves printing local horror stories and urban legends. This one was said to be cursed. Supposedly a bunch of children had gone missing there, one after another, but it sounded like the usual overblown urban legends from the old Eroguro horror boom, so neither of us really took it seriously. Still, the place had a creepy vibe. Crumbled earthen walls, rotting furniture, and bedding left behind. The kind of scenery that gives you a weird thrill. We wandered through the ruined homes, making weird guttural noises, trying to spook each other out, joking around like a pair of idiots. We'd been there a while, looping around the edge of the village, when we stumbled onto what looked like some kind of facility. The outer gate had a rusted sign that said something like Himawari Daycare, or maybe it was Tanpopo. I can't quite remember, but it was either sunflower or dandelion in Japanese anyway. Beyond the gate we could see an old playground, which had equipment and a sandpit. On the exterior walls you could still see the faded scribbles of kids who'd once gone there. It was clearly a nursery or a childcare center. Lucky for us, well, lucky in a sense. The windows had already been shattered, and we were kind of getting bored of just wandering around the usual dilapidated houses, so we decided to head inside. As expected, the interior was completely trashed. Blankets, toys, and papers were scattered everywhere, and there was dust in every beam of light. The first room we entered looked like it had once hosted a farewell party of some kind. There were origami decorations stuck to the walls and hanging from the ceiling, most of them faded and falling apart. One banner, made of torn construction paper, read something like, "Goodbye, Tak-kun." I don't remember the exact name. That, along with the setup of the room, made it pretty obvious that this had been some kind of send-off party. And after that we went from room to room exploring what was left. That's when we started noticing something weird. Almost everything that could be locked was locked. Cabinets, drawers, lockers, every single one had a padlock or a latch on it. It felt excessive. We figured maybe there was something hidden, so we started searching for the keys. We knew it wasn't exactly the most respectful thing to do, but we started kicking aside junk on the floor, flipping over boards, leaning against the walls. Curiosity won out. Eventually we found a bigger room, maybe the dining hall or some kind of gathering space. This one was noticeably larger than the others. At the back of the room there was a sliding door that led outside. The door itself had been sealed up tight. Heavy chains, a solid padlock, but weirdly, the door panels had come off the track, and a gap had opened up, just wide enough for us to squeeze through. We slipped outside. Behind the facility, the land dropped off sharply into some kind of shallow ravine. Tall metal fencing enclosed the area, and it seemed like that locked door had been the only real way to access it. The whole setup felt intentional, like they hadn't wanted people back there, which of course made us even more excited to explore. But in the end, there wasn't much to see. Just a burned out incinerator, and a shed that looked like it had been empty for decades. We were kind of disappointed, but just as we turned to go back inside, I happened to notice something strange. That room with the farewell party, the one with the decorations, from outside it looked like there was an odd bump in the wall, a protrusion that didn't line up with the interior space. Maybe there was some additional room that we hadn't explored yet. I didn't remember there being any room there. It bugged me enough that we decided to go back in to take another look. It turned out that weird bump wasn't in that room, it was the room behind it. So we went around to check. It was a small space, more like a storage room or a closet. The walls were packed, floor to ceiling, with futons and old blankets. Just old bedding, nothing strange. We almost left, but just as I was turning to go, I caught a glimpse of something behind the pile of bedding. There was a gap, an empty space hidden behind the blankets. I really didn't want to touch those filthy things, but curiosity got the better of me yet again. I dragged the futons aside one by one and I stepped inside. The hidden space was about the size of a 4 tatami room. 6 square meters or 17 square foot. The floor and walls were covered in blue tile. No windows, no bath, it just looked like a bathroom with the tub ripped out. Just a faucet, a tap, a drain in the center, and the frayed remains of light fixtures overhead. That was all. I would have assumed that this was some kind of washing area for rinsing out soiled clothes or for cleaning up after the kids, but the floor told a different story. Dark reddish stains had soaked into the tile. Some of them were thick and coagulated, congealed. And around the drain, tufts of hair, black hair, long and tangled, stuck to the floor, clinging to the walls. In the corners, something was seriously wrong with this place. I backed out of there fast. I didn't hesitate. I needed to find my friend and get the hell out of there. I found him in what looked like a staff office. He managed to pry open one of the lockers and was rummaging around. The second he saw me, he waved over to me, smiling. "Hey, check this out. This is freaking crazy, right?" He was holding a pair of pliers and an owl, a small tool for piercing holes in leather. Both were covered in that dark, black gunk I'd seen in that hidden room. He just kept laughing, completely unfazed. "I think it's rust, right?" he asked. "But it does look like blood or something, huh?" He even joked, "Man, what if this place was some kind of murder scene or something?" I couldn't laugh, not even a little. Not with what I'd just seen. I told him everything, and what I thought. Then I dragged him back to that secret, gross room, and after that, all the laughter and smiles were gone. After that, we got out of that village as fast as we could, without looking back. We did report it to the police, and we made sure to explain exactly where it was, and exactly what we found. But I don't think anything came of it, because I certainly didn't get any follow-up. As far as I know, there was no investigation either. I guess being out in the middle of nowhere, and considering the absurdity of the story, they must have thought it was a prank. Maybe it was. Maybe the whole thing was my imagination or a trick of the light in a crumbling ruin. I don't know. Maybe it was all placed there as a joke or some kind of stunt. I don't know. I'll never know. But I wanted to put it out there just in case. For what it's worth, my friend said that he opened a couple of other lockers too, and all that he found besides the tools were a stack of dirty magazines and some kind of iron ring. No idea what that was about, but it was probably the most disturbing sight I've ever seen when I stepped into that blue room.